Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are going to dive straight into a breakdown of the incredibly complex, on-the-ground geopolitical realities of the Gaza conflict. We're basing our analysis today on a fascinating and highly revealing broadcast from NewsX World, which featured a really in-depth interview with former Israeli diplomat Ambassador Alan Pinkas. The situation down there is shifting so rapidly, and the rhetoric we hear from politicians doesn't always match the stark reality. So today we're cutting through all that noise to look objectively at what's actually happening.
Okay, let's dive into this. We are going to start with breaking news on the ground, and then we'll zoom out to look at Hamas's endurance, the sheer reality of the situation in Gaza, the huge dilemma of military control, and finally, those massive overarching geopolitical roadblocks that are stalling peace.
Section 1. The recent airstrikes. Just recently, it was reported that Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip took out 4 senior commanders. Now, these guys weren't just everyday fighters, they were key players in what's known as Hamas's general security mechanism. The IDF specifically named Hassan Labad. He was the deputy head of this mechanism, along with Assam Shabir, Abdullah Abu Khalub, and Mohammed Abu Mar. So to really understand the significance of this, we need to know what exactly this target was. According directly to the IDF, the General Security Mechanism is a completely clandestine body. Think of it as an inner shield. It's responsible for protecting Hamas leadership, managing all of their internal communications, and actively churning out intelligence assessments for terror operations. So taking out leadership in this specific mechanism was a very calculated military objective.
But as with all military actions in such a densely packed area, there is always a devastating human cost. Gaza health officials, who were cited in the broadcast, stated that at least 9 Palestinians were killed in these specific strikes, and tragically, that included 5 members of the exact same family.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds into the bigger picture of Hamas's current capabilities. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the estimate provided by Ambassador Alan Pinkas. He asserts that despite the intense and incredibly prolonged nature of this war, Hamas actually still controls roughly 35 to 40% of Gaza. That is a highly significant chunk of territory to still be under their sway, and it fundamentally contradicts any of those claims that the group has been completely dismantled. And it's not just about the territory, it's the manpower. Ambassador Pinkas noted that Israel estimates there are still about 25,000 armed Hamas members just walking around and basically running the show. He did controversially describe them as cockroaches in a bottle, mainly because there isn't really a functional society left for them to run. But that sheer number, 25,000 armed individuals, means their military capability is very much intact.
Which brings us to Section 3, the actual situation in Gaza. To grasp this, we really have to contrast the political rhetoric with the reality on the ground. We constantly hear bombastic claims from leaders. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks of total victory, yet the reality is an unlivable, prolonged war. Former President Donald Trump proposed peace plans with a stabilized interim government, and even talked about rebuilding Gaza to look like Singapore or Las Vegas. But the reality? Gaza is in complete ruins. It's just rubble, is entirely dysfunctional with absolutely no basic government services.
And to put the massive scale of this humanitarian crisis into perspective, there are over 2 million people currently condensed into makeshift refugee camps. They are without basic supplies, the infrastructure is totally gone. It is, like the ambassador said, simply unlivable. Now, regarding the state of the conflict, the NewsX World host made a highly specific assertion on air. They explicitly claimed that all the Israeli hostages have been returned, including all the remains, leaving absolutely no hostages in Gaza. We're noting this specific claim impartially here, right as the broadcast transitioned into discussing the stalled peace plans.
Section 4. The Control Dilemma. As this war just keeps dragging on, the dynamics of military occupation are shifting drastically. Initially, there was an agreement citing 53% Israeli control for security purposes, but Prime Minister Netanyahu recently stated plans to increase that footprint to nearly 70%. And according to Ambassador Pinkas, Netanyahu was even winking at audiences, suggesting they're going to push that all the way to 100%.
But this expansion prompts a critical question, which the broadcast host raised. Why would Hamas actually disarm? If Israeli control keeps expanding and the strikes continue, what on earth is their incentive? The ambassador's view is that they simply don't have one. Hamas has a vested interest in not disarming right now because they literally have nowhere else to go.
So the crucial point is this stark warning from Ambassador Pincus about Israel's massive dilemma. They want the security control for sure, but they absolutely do not want the immense responsibility of governing a broken Gaza. As Pincus says, you occupy, you break, you own, it's that simple. Taking 100% control means taking on the colossal liability of 2 million people in a devastated territory.
This brings us to Section 5, Roadblocks to Reconstruction. So why are all these big international peace plans failing to materialize? Take Donald Trump's proposed 3-phase peace plan. It is entirely stalled. Even Phase 1 hasn't been implemented. Just run through this list of failures. The ceasefire is not happening. Humanitarian aid is completely insufficient. Hamas isn't disarming. A new Gaza government is not forming, and reconstruction hasn't even begun.
And this brilliantly illustrates the cascading geopolitical effect at play here. The original plans relied heavily on other people's money, but the separate war involving Iran has totally shattered the economies and business models of the Arab Gulf states, which means the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emiratis don't have those anticipated free billions to just funnel into Gaza. That regional funding has completely dried up.
And the financial need is just astronomical. Estimates suggest it will cost roughly $70 billion just to begin the reconstruction of Gaza. With the Gulf states' money totally off the table, that $70 billion is nowhere to be found. Which leaves us with a highly explosive status quo. Ambassador Pincus left us with a very stark, provocative thought to end on today. If this immense building pressure cannot be released in Gaza, either militarily or from a humanitarian perspective, will it inevitably find a way to explode in the West Bank? The pressure is absolutely mounting, and this is a fragile, dangerous reality that we're going to have to keep monitoring. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and we will see you next time.